Shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator, the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, brothers and sisters, we do not intend for it to be long. Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, we ask you all to get your pens, your pads, your papers, and to take notes. Brothers and sisters, we hope everybody is well and will be better. For those who do know recently that I was hospitalized due to a situation regarding health, brothers and sisters. But giving honor and praise unto the Most High, I feel a whole lot better, brothers and sisters. So, if I can be heard and if people are in good spirits, please type in the number 4. If I can be heard and if people are in good spirits, please type in the number 4. All right? So, let us, brothers and sisters, continue in this vein, continue in this particular manner. We call this one here, brothers and sisters, From Jerusalem to the Hood, Part 6. Now, there's been a series of these from Part 1, which was done, say, back some time ago, all the way up to now in Part 6. We intend for this to be the last part of this series. All right? And without, brothers and sisters, any further ado, let me pull up the PowerPoint and continue in this particular case. Thank you for that, brothers and sisters. So we're going to stop the camera because people already know who it is in this particular case. Go to present, if you will. In this case, and just redo it in this manner, share screen, right? We ask you all to subscribe to the channel and to comment, like, and share, brothers and sisters. All right. So we ask you all to get your pens, your pads, your paper, and to take notes. All right. Let us continue in this particular manner, brothers and sisters. We're going to start from current slide and move on in that particular case. Check the description. Tune in this coming quote Monday, June 19th, as you can see that time has passed, for a lesson on the memorialization of 12 presidents and their role in ownership. We ask you to subscribe to the channel, to comment, like, and share. We also ask you all to patronize the books that are written by myself, my lady Sarai, and us. We can be reached at 908-587-4841. 908-587-4841 or 718-864-3125. All right, for those who are interested in that particular case. Now, if you go in your own time to Mori Yeshaya history lessons, there is a presentation that is done called The Honoring of Presidents and Ownership. Now, when I speak about ownership, I'm talking about presidents who were slave masters, if you will. So when we begin to close out this particular series called From Jerusalem to the Hood, again, asking you all to get your pens, your pad, and your paper and take notes. We intend, brothers and sisters, to continue, if we will, about the happy post-Memorial Day in a series called History Not for the Novice. All right, so subscribe to the channels and let's move on in this particular case. All right. Migration and let the book speak. In the 9th century BCE, the people from Tari went from there to settle in what is now Tunisia in the 4th century BCE. It is said they, according to Hanno, and the Periplus went from Carthage to Gambia. Now, we've gone over this particular one, but what we want to do is show more references in what we're talking about in this particular case. Reynolds, in his book, Stay in the Storm, stated that the distance from Gambia, which is in West Africa, to the West Indies is 3,200 miles. Cowley, in his book, Black Cargoes, stated that Basel Negroes were brought from the West Indies to Virginia. So, we're going to show what we're talking about, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. All right? Shalom, brother Jared Judah. Shalom, Adonia, Kanan Yehuda. Shalom, Matzatiya. Shalom to everybody in the chat who have spoken and participated in such. All right. Let's go, brothers and sisters, and we're going to read just part of the notes that you see there in this particular case. Right? Let's go to Leviticus chapter 26, verse 33, if we will. Leviticus, the 26th chapter, brothers and sisters, in the 33rd verse. And it reads as follows. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. So this right here is talking about what will happen to, sadly, brothers and sisters, in this case, the children of Israel. All right? It distinctly says what? It says, and I will scatter you among the heathen. So Israel, we must remember, can never just properly be identified by saying one was displaced or one was removed, but more so, rather, one was scattered, if we will. Let's go to Psalms 44, brothers and sisters, verse 11. We want to let the book speak on the Shabbat. All right, Psalm chapter 44, if we will, verse 11. All right, and it reads as follows. Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat, and hast scattered us among the heathen. Verse 11. Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat, and hast scattered us among the heathen. So now we see, brothers and sisters, by the time the psalmist is writing this, brothers and sisters, all right, among the sons of Korah, who were of the tribe of the Levites, the Israelites were already becoming scattered. The Israelites were already being scattered, brothers and sisters. We read in the Torah in Leviticus 26 about a prophecy of such, but what we just read right there is we begin to see that it still started to happen, say, in biblical times itself. Let's go from there, brothers and sisters, and go to Jeremiah chapter 31, if we will. We're going to go into Jeremiah chapter 31, brothers and sisters, and we're going to start in verse 10. And it reads as follows. Hear ye the word of Yah, O ye nations, and declare in the isles afar off, and say, he that scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. So the sheep that we see scattered in the beginning of the scattering, or diaspora, as some may refer to it as, in the book of Psalms, we begin to see later on in scriptures that the Most High is saying he who scattered Israel will gather him. This is why, no disrespect intended, no one set chart can actually sit there and say this is where all the Israelites are scattered, because the scattering of the Israelites was done by the Most High in this particular case. All right. And it was not, no disrespect intended, scattered according to tribe, but rather scattered according to the deeds of the people. And we have pointed that out, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. All right. We're going to go, brothers and sisters, with the time allotted, into 1 Kings chapter 8, if we will. All right. In the book of 1 Kings chapter 8, brothers and sisters, it reads as follows. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 46. This is part of Solomon's prayer, brothers and sisters. if they sin against thee, for there is no man that sinneth not. And thou be angry with them, and deliver them to the enemy, so that they carry them away captives into the land of the enemy, far or near. Let's stop right there, brothers and sisters. Solomon is saying in his prayer to the Most High, if they Israel sin, for there is no man that sins not. David before him has stated that man has no mercy. So what can we gain and ascertain in that particular case? David already has stated, deliver me not in the hands of man, for man has no mercy. And Solomon later on is saying, for there is no man that sinneth not. You know, it's not mercy when somebody tells you what he or she did and you bring it back up to him or her, and then bring it back up to him or her, and bring it back up to him or her, because we wouldn't want the Most High to do that to us. We wouldn't want the Most High to say, that sin that you did and that sin that you did. You understand? And this is why, brothers and sisters, in pointing this out, there is no man that sinneth not. All right? So let's see what this is saying in this particular case. Again, this is part of the prayer of Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 8. And it continues to read as follows, brothers and sisters. And thou be angry with them, and deliver them to the enemy, so that they carry them away captives unto the land of the enemy, far or near. So whether the captivity was close in proximity to the land of Israel, where Solomon was, or far, let's see what it says in this particular case. Yet if they shall bethink themselves in the land where they were carried captives, and repent, and make supplication unto thee, in the land of them that carried them captives, saying, we have sinned, and we have done perversely, we have committed wickedness. What can we gather from this part right here? If they bethink themselves, meaning to take into consideration, brothers and sisters, in this particular case, right? In the land where they were carried captives, don't let anybody tell you that you cannot repent before the Most High because we are in the land of captivity. You understand? We want to point that out for edification purposes. It goes on to say, brothers and sisters, in this particular case, and repent and make supplication unto thee in the land of them that carried them captives, saying, we have sinned, we have done perversely, we have committed wickedness. And so return unto thee with all their heart, and with all their soul, in the land of their enemies. So, brothers and sisters, Leviticus 26 has already spoken in the past about the people returning to the Most High and making confession for their sins and for the sins of their ancestors, for the iniquities of their own, our own, and the iniquities of our forefathers. That is to say, our ancestors. So, brothers and sisters, no, we don't do ancestor worship, but we acknowledge our ancestors existed. What can we gather from that? If an iniquity is a transgression of the law, how are there people teaching that we can't keep the law and what it is people don't want people to return to Yah, one way, shape, form, fashion, or another. I have a book called Black Culture and Black Consciousness by Samuel Levine. In it, the slave master is telling the slave, we brought you here to serve us, not to serve God. So anyone at any given time, brothers and sisters, is telling you to not call upon the Most High, to not ask the Most High to be with one any way, shape, form, fashion at any given time, that is satanic. That is of Ruach HaSatan, or the adversarial spirit. You don't want that kind of energy around. You want to be around people who want to call upon the Most High. This is why, as the brother typed in 1 Kings chapter 8, very deep, Israelites been citing this for decades. You understand? So this again, brothers and sisters, is something that we want to point out, if we will, for edification purposes. All right? So let's continue on and see what it says in this particular manner. And so return unto thee with all their heart, and with all their soul, in the land of their enemies, which led them away captive and prey unto thee toward their land, which thou gavest unto their fathers. That's why we pray eastward, because we ourselves are in the west. All right? So don't let people tell you, oh, the maps are reversed and all of that, because they may want you to pray in the wrong direction. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. In the city which thou hast chosen, and the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou their prayer and their supplication in heaven, thy dwelling place, and maintain their cause, and forgive thy people that have sinned against thee, and all their transgressions wherein they have transgressed against thee, and give them compassion before them that carried them captive, that they may have compassion on them, for they are your people and your inheritance, which thou bringest forth out of Egypt from the midst of the furnace of iron. So, brothers and sisters, we want to point this out for edification purposes, if we will, right? Let's go, though it's not on the list here, to the book of 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 1. And it came to pass, when Solomon had finished the building of the house of Yah, and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire, which he was pleased to do, that Yah appeared to Solomon the second time, as he had appeared unto him in Gibeon. And Yah said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. Let's stop right there. The Most High is saying that he heard the prayer and the supplication that Solomon made before him. So when we talk about the offerings of our lips, brothers and sisters, and when we talk about giving forth prayers and things of that kind of nature, that's nothing to sit there and take lightly. Because we have, brothers and sisters, as Israelites, a God that hears prayer. You understand? We have, brothers and sisters, a God that attends to the sound of his people. When Israel cried out in the land of Egypt, brothers and sisters, it says the Most High saw and knew. One of the things elders have stated in Israel these days is that Israel in general don't cry out enough. It seems as if, maybe no disrespect intended, too complacent, too much of liking this society, too much of liking not getting along, too much of liking not respecting one another, too much of liking generational curses, too much of liking, brothers and sisters, no true love shown to one another. So, brothers and sisters, what are we to do? And what is the solution to the plight of our people? Because we already went over the history. We already went over in part why we go through and went through the situations that we've gone through. This is why it was important for them to make sure that we do not know how to read. There are records of people having their tongues cut out for reading. In North Carolina, there are records of brothers and sisters, the quote-unquote nicest slave masters, were making sure that while the black female was naked until the time of uncleanness starting, that reading was forbidden. Anytime somebody doesn't want you to read something, and I've been a former thief, I didn't want mommy to sit there and look at the receipt because I knew what I did. So was it the same thing with the other? Oh, you're looking into that? What you looking into that for? I remember not being funny talking about colleges and all of that, right? Hey, and I was called by my government name. You're studying Black history? Yeah, I'm just decided to take that as an elective. You know, see, when you know what you've done in that particular case, and having no kind of concern toward it, on how it could be, should be eradicated, and so forth, that's a problem. And while many of our people are talking about, quote, reparations, I would like to state, and this is not to play prophet, if they were to pay off our people and quote reparations, how then do they get the judgment for the things that they've done? Let's talk about that for instance. The Israelite servant system, you don't separate the family. One, they did that over here. In the Israelite servant system, you don't return a slave or a servant back to his or her owner. Israelite culture supports harboring your slaves. That wasn't the culture in North Carolina. You understand? The Code of Hammurabi stated it was a death penalty, brothers and sisters, to sit there and to harbor a slave. So the Bible, in this case, namely, you're going to only have me cite the Old Testament, quote unquote, is not, quote, their book. There was a reason why it was imperative for us to not to know to read. Brothers and sisters, look at Denmark Vesey. He was a problem to the slave community and he knew how to read. Robert Smalls was a problem to the slave community and he knew how to read. Nat Turner was a problem to the slave community and he knew how to read. Frederick Douglass was a problem to the slave community and he knew how to read. When you watch the original Roots movie, it goes to say, well, how can it be a crime to teach them to read? Well, they ignorant, a slave is ignorant. He eats, he sleeps, and he handles his business and he's happy. Now, if we teach them to read, no, that will not be a good thing. Did you know that there were black people in less than 100 years ago in the South and the North that could not read because they were the children of slave people? Less than 100 years ago in the 1930s, these people being elders could not even sit there and read. Did you know that there were preachers in the church that could not sit there and read? You saw the original Roots movie. You see me spelling my name, K-I-Z-Z-Y. And out of fear, the mother slapped the daughter. No reading, no writing. And that's the same thing, sadly, being pushed with us. Let's get a little personal, no disrespect intended. Ain't no point in writing a book. Now, everybody may not be an author, but in this day and time, brothers and sisters, when you can talk your book into existence in Kindle, when you can have a ghostwriter if you're interested in such, when you can sit there and have it published in less than a week, depends upon your spirit, there is no reason why, be it poetry, like some of the Psalmist poets, history, the Book of Chronicles is a historical book, and other matters that we can't sit there and get things out. Jeremiah, as pointed out, didn't write Jeremiah. Baruch did. Isaiah didn't write Isaiah. A gentleman, an elder by the name of Yeremiah wrote the book of Isaiah. Alex Haley wrote the book that we call the autobiography of Malcolm X. And for those into the rap world, believe it or not, that song that Dr. Dre and Snoop did, I think it was Dre Day, correct me if I'm wrong on the title of the song. Jay-Z, the rapper, wrote that. They flew him out from wherever he was at to California, and he wrote the song. You got artists back in the day like Smokey Robinson that was writing songs for the Temptations. So why is it in this day and time we are so complacent? I don't know if that's my spirit. It may not be your spirit, but get something, even if it's verbal, in written form for your children so they can see something. When the Romans, brothers and sisters, came up against Jerusalem, one of the things they wanted to do was to make sure, get rid of their writings. The teachers that I come from, and I say this in no dishonor, one of the things, no disrespect intended, that a brother wanted to do to try to curtail that is we have Rudolph Windsor, who wrote the book From Babylon to Timbuktu. Kohen Mikael, who wrote the book, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference. Imam Shoshana, who wrote the book, So You Want to Learn Hebrew. Moses Farrar, who wrote several books online. And then you got people like Tyrone Webb, who sit there and push out other Israelite authors and so forth and so on. Those are things that motivated myself to want to write. I met the elder Moses Farrar, for those who are familiar with him. He rewrote with permission the book called Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa that was written by a European Jewish guy named Stephen Jacobs. You can see that online, brothers and sisters. I met Moses Farrar the same month that my mother passed away in 2004. May my Imam rest in peace, who was also talking about trying to get some poetry out. So, brothers and sisters, what we want to point out for edification purposes is get your information out there. We've been taught as children, fill out the application. Make sure you quote, stay in the line. Make sure your penmanship is pretty well. And with all the recordings going on, there's virtually no reason why that canon should not be, brothers and sisters. All right, just want to point that out. So while we talk about that, let's go and close this particular portion out. I'm going to ask, because I can't really hear myself, if I can be heard and people in good spirits, please type in the number 4. If I can be heard and people in good spirits, please type in the number 4. We are going to read in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 1. And it reads as follows. And it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shall return to the Lord thy God, Yah Eloheka, and shall obey his voice, according to all that I command thee this day, thou and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul. That then Yah, your power, the Lord thy God, will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will we return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. So when we talk about scattering matters and so forth and so on, as in this particular case here, we already read earlier about Israel being scattered in Leviticus chapter 26. And then we begin to see happen during the time when the psalmist is writing in Psalms 44. So what the Most High is saying is when Israel bethinks themselves, recounts what's going on, and return to the Most High and obey his voice according to what is being spoken and commanded in that particular day. No disrespect intended. Israel was not told to look toward a new book, a new doctrine. All Israelites, brothers and sisters, go to Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28 is part of the Torah. So when they start talking about whether someone is Torah-based, your foundation in this understanding of Israel is based in the Torah. So please, brothers and sisters, let us not snap on, disrespect brothers and sisters who are deemed to be, quote, Torah-based. All right? So let's go on in this particular case right here. Right? Let's go back. It says, brothers and sisters, looking upon it in this manner, right? We are going to use, if we will, right, the laser pointer. 9th century BC, the people from Tyre went from there to settle in what is now Tunisia. So let's look. Tyre or Tyrus, we see right here, and I'm going to circle it on the map so we can see what we're talking about in this particular case, all right? This is the area we're talking about in this, with the people of the Phoenice or the Phoenicians. That is not, brothers and sisters, a national appointed name. The term Phoenician comes from the Greek word for purple. And the Phoenician people in history are written about in Ezekiel chapter 26. Pardon me, Ezekiel 27. Did you know that? Ezekiel 27. So don't tell me that the so-called Old Testament is not a history book. When you read about the people of Tyre, brothers and sisters, they were actually Israelites that were also in association with Canaanites, as you see there. All right. So they went in part from there in this area here where Asher and Zebulun was, and went on their own volition to Carthago, this land over here in Tunisia, also referred to in history as Carthage. Now, we already read, right, about the whole scattering thing. What we want to point out in this particular case, in this presentation called From Jerusalem to the Hood, brothers and sisters, is the part of the scattering shown in maps for edification purposes. And again, let us show it, if we will, brothers and sisters. All right. Over here, Tunisia, which is in northern Africa, and the people that were in the so-called Middle East, which is a term that was created, brothers and sisters, a little over 120 so years ago by a guy named Mahan. I'm going to type that name in so you can look it up in your own reference. If you look that up, Mahan, an East Indian guy, no offense intended, and that, just want to point that out, if you will, in 1902, coined the term the Middle East. There is no language called Middle East. It's not 200 years old. The people that are called Middle Eastern don't even associate themselves as such. So we have to understand that different nations give different nations bywords. Israelites gave people bywords. Did you know that? The people called the Egyptians in history didn't call themselves Mizraim. Israel called them that. They called themselves Samatawi. And brothers and sisters, when you read about, and this is not to get sidetracked, Pharaoh inside of Egyptian has a different connotation than, say, Pharaoh in Hebrew. It wasn't until, say, the Middle Kingdom of Egypt that the term Pharaoh was applied to a person, meaning Pa'o, like mighty house. But Para in Hebrew means destroy. Pei Resh Ayin is what you call perhaps the Lamed Ayin verb. We'll discuss that another part in time, how that works in verb systems. All right. So this is something we want to point out. According to the book Before the Mayflower by Laurent Bennett Jr., we were called Ethiopians when we were taken off the boat. There's no people in antiquity, which means history, that were calling themselves that. We already pointed out in other maps that the Atlantic Ocean at one time was called the Ethiopian Sea. According to the book by Ivan Sertima, African Presence in Early Europe, the word Ethiopia comes from the Greek words Ethien Ops, which means burnt face. Another byword given to people, just as we pointed out in the last presentation about the Romans. The people called Greeks didn't call themselves that. The Romans called them Grecos. So why do we go into that? And how does that tie in just a little bit here? Recently, I discussed something with a brother who's Kemetic, right? Into the whole Egyptology thing, if you will. The Hypsostat and the Hypsostat. My question was, what record do we have, getting back to leaving records and writings, brothers and sisters, what record, brothers and sisters, did the people who are called Hyksos leave? Or are we just to rely on the stela from Amose of Dynasty 18, which might be biased, perhaps? Are we just to rely, brothers and sisters, on what Hatshepsut of Dynasty 18 stated about the Amu or the Asiatics? These Asiatics that were called by some the Hyksos, or the rulers of foreign lands, also called later on in the Greek the Hyksos, or quote-unquote shepherd kings, as some called them. What record did they leave? See why we be talking and see why we attempt to point out, brothers and sisters, about leaving records, having things on file? Don't leave it for somebody else to tell your story. Speak your truth. You understand? So getting back into this part right here, from the matter we have already gone over, right? If we will, right? Looking upon it in highlighter form, right? The people of Tyre going to Tunisia. See how this connects from Jerusalem to the hood? And then from there, went to Carthage, which is in Tunisia, to Gambia. Reynolds in his book, Stand a Storm, states that from Gambia to the West Indies, and some of us are from the West Indies ourselves, right? It's 3,200 miles. From the West Indies to Virginia. I'm sure many of us are from Virginia or have family in Virginia. So can we tie in the history, if we will, from Tyree, where we shown this being, brothers and sisters, over here, where the land of Israel is at, where the tribe of Zebulun and Asher was. See where we're going? All the way to Virginia. We ask you again, get your pens, your pads, your paper, and take notes. Brothers and sisters, we ask you again, get your pens, your pads, your paper, and take notes. Let's continue. Now, let's look at this map right here, North America. Now, I want to, brothers and sisters, show with the laser pointer, if I may, right? This would be where the vicinity of where the people of Tyre or Tyrus that you read of, brothers and sisters, in Ezekiel 27 talks about, right? Went over to this place in Carthage in Tunisia. Then went over here to where the Gambia was, or is still to this day. Now, mind you, the Gambia is in modern day Senegal. Again, the Gambia is in modern day Senegal. All right, you got tribes there like the Mandinko or Mandinka, correct me if I mispronounced it, the Fula or the Fulani, brothers and sisters, and others. Wolof, for instance. Let me know if I stand to be corrected. I'm open to constructive criticism because you can't teach without being teachable. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. West Indies we see over here. Brothers and sisters. Jamaica being one of the most principal places. And in North America, in the United States part, over here we see where Virginia is. So we have, if we were to use, in this particular case, right, a pen from this part to this part, and then using a pen, brothers and sisters, again, thank you for the time, into over here, then going over here to over here. So when we call this here, brothers and sisters, from Jerusalem to the hood, and don't sleep, no disrespect intended. People like myself out of New York, there are, quote, the hood in other states. Brooklyn is not the toughest place in the United States. You do not want to go to Paterson, New Jersey. You do not want to go to, brothers and sisters, while not praising the, quote, hood. You understand? Southern New Jersey. Camden, brothers and sisters, where they took, for the lack of a better term, if you will, buckshot at Billy Paul when he was performing. You do not want to, brothers and sisters, tangle with the hoods of Chicago, LA, Detroit. And I say this to my quote-unquote New Yorkers, because no disrespect intended, sometimes people may see New Yorkers as tough. No. So when we call this from Jerusalem to the hood, and as you may see, the picture that was used showing the projects is where I personally came from, out of Flatbush, Brooklyn. They tried to change the name to sit there and call it Flatbush Gardens. But those who do know, that's front page, that's Vanderveer, where I personally, not to sadden the spirit, saw 2 people get shot before I was even 10 years old. So these curses that prolong upon us as a people, brothers and sisters, his eye shall be evil toward his brother, if you will. We talk about the law of looking out for the fatherless. We pointed out in the past, in the said black community, you ain't got to go far to find fatherless. You can go on the same block that you might stay on. See, if we were to keep these commandments, we may see a lot more peace in this particular case. So while we talk about the historical, the spiritual, the lingual meaning of language, as we go over in Hebrew, and so forth and so on. We want to point out at the same time, if we will, brothers and sisters, a solution for our people. What many, no disrespect intended, black scholars do not touch upon, because only the Torah had the answer to our people's situation. We tried every other doctrine on earth, as the saying goes. We out Pope the Pope and out Muhammad. If our people were to return back to the Torah, and I'm not saying this as a prophet, I'm saying it as a person who understands and reads what's in the scriptures, and return back to the Most High God, you will begin to see our people rise up and the others fall. And don't think the scriptures talk about it. Let's go into it. Let's go. All right. Psalm chapter 81, if we will. All right. Thank you for the timing. We are in the scriptures in Psalms chapter 81. Brothers and sisters, in this particular case, right? Psalms chapter 81, and it reads as follows. Psalms 81, verse 13. Oh, that my people had hearkened unto me, and Israel had walked in my ways. I should soon have subdued their enemies and turned my hand against their adversaries. The brother typed in Shuvah. Some may say without the V, Shubah, from the word Shab, which means what? To return. What the brother Adonia just typed in is saying Shuvah means, for other terms, repentance. We have to return back to our Creator. And this is not to get sidetracked. This is why the nations cannot sit there and, quote, offer us reparations. Because you cannot pay me for hanging my ancestor upside down and cutting the baby out. That's what they used to do in slavery. You can't pay me for doing what is shown in the movie Django, where they had the dogs attacking the people. There's no compensation with your funny money, which is what they call a debt-bearing note. Brothers and sisters, to sit there and say, well, here, we'll pay you for this, so you can put it right back inside of their same economy. So these are things, brothers and sisters, we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? So if there's any questions, comments, please put it inside the chat. If there's any questions or comments, please put it inside of the chat. Let's go on, if we will, brothers and sisters. All right, let's look. In South America, they are shown on the map New Grenada. Brothers and sisters, that included Colombia. In Colombia, there was a part back in the 1530s called Cartagena. Cartagena in Colombia, brothers and sisters, is where many of our people were treated as captives. We see, going to the left side of it, quote, New Spain. In places, brothers and sisters, like Honduras, in places, brothers and sisters, like Belize, in places, brothers and sisters, like Costa Rica and so forth, and Panama. We were enslaved in those places, brothers and sisters. You understand? Cuba was the place that the slave ship called the Tacora went to. And then the people who were resold after the Portuguese ship called the Tacora was called the Amistad that you read of in history in the 1830s. Israelites caught on to it, if you will, when it was stated that the women in the slave ship movie Amistad was singing, saying Yahweh. That's not by accident that the producers and the directors had that. They know who is who. They know this history. Remember, we were the people that were made to not read over legality, not righteousness, but over legality. There was a president that said that he fears for his country when he reflects that God is just. We already went over the slave masters in Florida saying we brought you here to serve us, not to serve God. So they wanted to keep that communication off. Brothers and sisters, they didn't want that communication between us and the Most High there. So they do things to put hindrances between us and the connection with the Most High. You understand? One of the biggest weapons we have is prayer before the Most High. In slavery, they used to sit there and have their head inside of a pot with water and pray so the slave master would not hear it. In religious services, the overseer had to be there in order for the prayer to be conducted. In the so-called Old Testament, we just read that the people, if they make supplication before the Most High, saying, we have gone astray from you, O Yah. We read that in 1 Kings 8 and in 1 Kings 9. The Most High is telling Solomon, I have heard your prayer. So we don't need to pray in secret. We ain't got to hide us calling upon our Lord and Savior, Yah Elohim. You understand? This is a connection that we want to gain back to the Most High God with. So anything, and I mean any and everything, that has us connecting to the Most High, from our talents, to our gifts, to our family structure, to our love for one another, eliminate that. Make it seem as if it's not even worth one's time. So, brothers and sisters, from the West Indies, and this place here just showing Jamaica, right, to the United States, and this is shown here also in this map. The majority of the slave ships went to Brazil in South America. The least amount went to what we call the United States of today. You understand? The first ships actually went to Europe, but going west, starting, say, some people dated 1506, some people dated it 1518, going west by the upholdment of brothers and sisters Bartolome de las Casas, who helped in part get what they call the Asiento, which was used later on by John Hawkins. John Hawkins worked for Queen Elizabeth, the daughter of Queen Mary of England. John Hawkins worked alongside the Portuguese and Spaniards, having our people brought to what we call Venezuela of today. What can we point out? Trying to cause more disunity, trying to cause more problems. Put the black man from America against the black man in the West Indies, and have the black man in America on YouTube saying, the rights that we have fought for is being taken away by people from Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. That's a thing going on now online. Not that the Japanese, the Chinese, East Indians, the Eastern Europeans come over and ride on a coat of the so-called black man that since the days of Martin Luther King were doing things to get laws changed. Instead of trying to come together as a people, they have quote-unquote melanated people looking at each other saying, you from Jamaica, you want to sit there and take away the rights. Not the person from Eastern Russia or from Eastern Europe that come over and live in the United States free, rent-free for 1 year. See the game that's being played for those who are able to follow up in that particular case? Then you have those, no disrespect intended, say from the islands, if you will, that don't want to, quote, deal with, quote, the black American. Forgetting that many of the shared rights of, quote, black people in America or the United States, to a great extent, was started and promoted and the seed planted by a man from Jamaica who died in the 1940s by the name of Marcus Garvey, whose parents of Malcolm X was friends with. And for those who know about the history of the Garvey movement, Israelites were a part of it. Did you know that Marcus Garvey movement in the 1920s had people that was from the Israelite community based in Harlem associated with it? And there was no you from the islands, I'm from the mainland here kind of story. So these are things, brothers and sisters, that we want to point out for edification purposes. Why do they try to, in many cases, make history seem boring or out of place? It's the same reason why, and I use myself as an example, if somebody were to show me a receipt from 1988, and I know good and well that I took the $5 change and stole it as a kid, and somebody shows me this receipt from when I was 8 years old, I'm now 43, I'm like, man, what's the point in that? Man, that's in the past, man. What's the point in that? And of course, that's long forgotten and forgiven in that particular realm. I'm using that as an example because some people don't want to see what it is. But on the other hand, you have those who, no disrespect intended, refuse to let you forget and forgive yourself. But when you say something, I did this, and it's brought back to your presence as if it has that person's permission to do so. That's why David said, deliver me not in the hands of man, for man has no mercy. You understand? So, brothers and sisters, we hope everybody is well and will be better. Let us continue in this presentation. West African people saying they are Hebrews, and this is in part, not, there are other tribes that say, but I just want to point this out here. The people in Ghana called the Ga people. The people in Ghana called the Sefwi. The people in Nigeria called the Igbo. Some people pronounce it as Igbo. I met a couple of them that say, yeah, we are Igbo Jews. I've met some from Nigeria saying that. The people from Nigeria called the Ebibio. The people from Nigeria called the Ewe. I remember a Fanti lady, the Fanti people live in Ghana, right? Told me hands down that the Ewe people are of the house of Israel and that they are Israelites. And of course, as is commonly pointed out, the people in Ghana called the Ashanti. So remember we was talking about this right here, right? Saying that from Tyre, which we pointed out, to Tunisia, Carthage is in Tunisia, to the Gambia, from the Gambia to the West Indies, from the West Indies to Virginia. Just want to point that out, showing the maps there again in that particular case. Jews first settled in a country now known as Tripoli, but the celebrated Arabian historian Ibn Khaldun asserts that the Nefusi, an ancient tribe of the Lowata, the Libyans of antiquity, themselves professed Judaism, a fact which had, he asserts, hitherto been unrecorded by Jewish historians. Now we got to cite exactly as it says, it should be Hebrew or Judah or Israel, but let's go on. There is an old tradition among the nomadic tribes of Tunisia that the Jews settled in the country before the destruction of the first temple. There can be little doubt that a colony of Jews existed in Carthage soon after the building of the city. Before the destruction of the first temple. Does anybody know the dating given to the first temple's destruction? When was the first temple destroyed? Now we're talking about the temple that Solomon had established, right? It was destroyed by the Babylonians, and we've gone over this in the past. But does anybody know the dating around said time that's given for it in this particular case? Please type it in because that gets to a point. Now, Solomon had, I wouldn't want to say mercenaries, but messengers that were going as far as modern day Spain to transact business. Tarshish, as it was called in the scriptures. You understand? That means that whether you call it Spanish or Castilian, ancient Israel messengers had to know how to speak the language there. Jonah was on the ship from Joppa to go to Tarshish. Tarshish is in Spain. Jonah would have had to know how to speak the language of the people in there. So let us not be like, there's no point in understanding the language. No, brothers and sisters, such is not the case. Yes. Thank you, Adonia, and thank you, Yirmiyahu, 586 BCE. Why, in part, does that become important? If this is the year 2023, right? And we add, brothers and sisters, if we will, right? 2023 plus 586. That gives us 2609. 2,609 years since the first temple was destroyed. 2,600, round off, 2,600 years since the first temple in Jerusalem was destroyed to this date. If there were, according to this, people in the lands of Northern Africa over 2,500 years ago, why would the people, the Israelites, in their own volition, scatter to Europe when they on over 2,500 years ago was scattering to places in Northern Africa? Everyone that fell as the kingdom in 586 BCE did not go into Babylon. Jeremiah, for instance, was taken to Egypt. We pointed this out already about the diaspora in this series. So this understanding of Israel and who is who, and why we as a people are landless, languageless, lawless, is because in the Torah is where it shows us where our land is at, what our culture is, and what we are to do, say, as a people. Again, there is no other said solution in that particular case. That's why when they make amendments in their constitution for quote black people, it don't work, because our laws come from the Most High, not from what came out of Parliament, not from what came from the people, brothers and sisters, that sat down at the first convention before Washington became president. Our laws and our constitution and our deliverance comes from what the Most High God stated. Let's continue on. Continue. It is impossible, however, even to conjuncture. We're going to ask you at this point, brothers and sisters, if I can be heard, and if you can get, if you're into it, please type in the number 4. If I can be heard and you're in good spirits, please type in the number 4. And if you haven't done so by this point, brothers and sisters, I ask you from my heart, get your pens, get your pads, get your paper, and take notes. If you have not gotten your pen, your pad, and your paper and taking notes, I'm asking you, please do so at this time for what we're going to get into. It is impossible, however, even to conjecture that the Jewish population of Carthage may have been, when that renowned city and republic challenged the Roman world for the mastership of the world, the Roman Empire for the mastership of the world. In recent times, a Jewish necropolis with many inscriptions in Latin and Hebrew has been discovered to the north of the site of the city near the hill Gamont. And although this ancient rock-hewn cemetery only contains about 200 tombs, there may have been other Jewish burial places in the vicinity. Carthage, we shown, is in Tunisia. We can expound upon why Latin was there, because eventually Carthage fell to the Romans. But who were the people that fell in Carthage to the Romans? The Hebrews, brothers and sisters. That's why you find it, as it's talked about there, with Hebrew inscriptions. Also, when you look at the left side of this, there are, as J. or Joel A. Rogers state, West Africa has black Jews also. I cited that in the book Egypt Talking Writing, all right, citing J.A. Rogers. So when you go into J.A. Rogers' book called 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro with Complete Proof, a book written way back when, that information is there in that particular case. You understand? Let's go on, if we will. Who sold who to who? African societies rarely sold their own people or those who were culturally close to them. Rather, they sold foreigners obtained from distant areas through trading networks and markets. You know where I got that from, that I just read? Where it says African societies and the markets thing. It's a book called Stand the Storm by Reynolds that cites that. African societies rarely sold their own people or those that were culturally close to them. So don't let people sit there and tell you, well, they were just selling their own people. That's not to say that never did happen. You understand? But the people they were selling was not their aunts in that particular manner. See, we might think today just, oh, they all were, quote, black, so you think they were all one people. But the Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Japanese may look the same, but they're not the same people culturally, ethnically. You understand? The people of Germany, the people of Russia, and the people of Poland, they all what you would call today's term white, but they're not the same people by culture and ethnicity. So the same, there were different ethnicities of whom you call black people. And as the brother Yirmiyahu typed in, Hamites sold mainly Shemites. There's a book, brothers and sisters, that speaks upon indigenous Africans recapturing people before the slave ships used to set sail, when they took the chains off in part of the people that were captives. What am I saying? In history, before the slave ships at times actually left from Western Africa, the people who were captives upon it would slay every Caucasian person there. But the people that were on the ship were recaptured by indigenous Africans, that's to say Hamites, and then resold into captivity in many cases. So, brothers and sisters, this is something we want to point out, not for anger purposes, but rather for edification purposes. And get the knowledge where you can get it from. You understand? Remember, it was a crime for us to know how to read. And we're going to show that on why, in part. Balboa in 1513 had 30 blacks with him when he discovered what is now the Pacific Ocean. Cortez, when he went to conquer what is now Mexico, had 300 blacks with him. Alvarado in the 16th century, that's to say the 1500s, when he went to Ecuador, had blacks with him. Blacks since the time of Henry the Navigator had been shipped to Portugal and to Spain as slaves. Vasquez alone in 1526 brought black people as slaves to what is now the Carolinas. So what was the point in going over those particular parts right there? Carolinas, I was just there, say, a couple of months ago, personally. Ecuador. Mexico. These are places that our people have been, and brothers and sisters are easily able to get to. Did you know that in these other places they talk about the Maroons of Jamaica and does talk about the slavery there as well? Same as in Brazil. Though the United States of America, or as they say the states in certain cases, has this information available in libraries, available for those who are interested, it is deemed boring in many cases or just suppressed. So if you got the spirit of the Most High to get this kind of information and bring it out, do so. Vasquez alone in 1526 brought black people as slaves to what is now the Carolinas. Brothers and sisters, slavery in what we call the United States of America did not start in 1619. The people that were brought in 1619 to Virginia, I ask and I ask again, not to beat, quote, a dead horse. What made that Dutch man of war comfortable to do that in 1619? And who is George Yardley? Who of the 20 slaves brought in 1619 to Charles Wolfe by the Dutchman of war, a gentleman named George Yardley got 15 of them. George Yardley died before, brothers and sisters, 1630. So when they tell us that in 1655 about the matter of Anthony Johnson, he was a black man who was a slave owner, you may want to look up these other names that are being presented. This is why I'm asking you all, family, get your pens, get your pad and paper to take notes. Just as much, and I use myself as an example, I didn't want the receipt to be read when I was stealing the change as an 8-year-old boy. So you got people that are grown that don't want people to check the receipt of a matter. Well, it wasn't me, it was them. And this is something that I ask people, and it's not to be, quote, racial or anything of that sort. There were black people who did wrong by black people. Yeah, we know that. But doesn't it seem odd that the only time we as, quote, black people are associated with others is when we're in the wrong? When you look at the list of black inventors, why, no disrespect intended, I didn't see a complete list together of just inventors, black and white together. But I have seen OG Mac of the Blood Gang, not that far from John Wayne Gacy. I seen associated the original 50 Cent out of Brooklyn, who is associated with said 30 murders, who's now deceased himself. When they want to sit there and talk about Dylan Roof, I've seen people try to make that kind of comparison. So the only time, brothers and sisters, that our people associated with others is when we ain't living right. So don't tell me it ain't about race. No, I didn't play the race card. You did. You said and pointed out the elevator, black man, doorknob, black man, door stopper, black man, traffic light, black man, cell phone, black man. And it's not to talk business on Shabbat, brothers and sisters. If over, say, 60, 70, 80 years ago, Madam C.J. Walker could be a millionaire, there's no reason why we as a people can't sit there and do interdependency with each other and get our things accomplished. There's no reason why. But, and not keeping the laws of loving your neighbor as yourself, and not being a light to make yourselves accountable according to the laws of the Most High, that's why it fails. You understand? You know why the nations laugh at us when we, as said, black people say it's because of the oppression, and it's because they know, as you see in the picture there, they're not getting a people weaker than them. Because if they were weaker than them, they wouldn't sit there and feel that they had to tie them up. You understand? I remember seeing people with cattle. They tie them up because they know good and well, if that deer in his antler comes at you, you're in trouble. They know if that goat bites you, you are in trouble. So just like cattle, like Psalms chapter 44 talks about Israel being scattered like the sheep, like the lambs, you only tie up that which you know is stronger than you, that you fear coming up against you. You understand? So, brothers and sisters, let's continue, and thank you for the time. You can sit there and be anywhere, but you chose to join in this particular presentation. Again, this is not to bring forth anything sad, to make anybody upset, or anything of that kind of sort. Just want to point this out for historical purposes. The Americas. It seems as if the United States wants to blame the colonists, and the colonists want to blame the Dutch and Spaniards regarding slavery. Yet they all benefited from the enslavement of the blacks. If I can be heard, and if people are in good spirits, I ask that ever so often because I can't hear myself the way the internet is set up here. Please type in the number 4. All right? If I can be heard and people in good spirits, I appreciate if you type in the number 4. Thank you. Most of the blacks captured and brought to the Western Hemisphere came from the Igbo, Ewe, Biafada, Bakando, Wolof, Bambara, Serea, Ibibio, and Arada peoples. Other, quote, highly advanced tribes such as the Mandinka, Ashanti, Fulani, and Dahomey rarely fell into European hands. There were over 30 slave holding houses alone in Ghana, the place of the Ashanti people. Since they really fell into Europeans' hands, we see that the average numbers given as the number of captives brought over is not accurate. The average number given of the captives brought to Brazil is between 5 and 13 million. Because in 1891, the Portuguese destroyed a lot of their slave records. This is why I'm asking you to get your pens and paper for edification purpose. That is a difference of almost the amount of people in New York City. They say there's 8 million people in New York City. So between 5 and 13 is a difference, say, of 8. So how many people was brought to what we call Brazil of today? There were forts built such as Axen, Elmina, both controlled by the Dutch. The Mabo, the Cape Coast Castle controlled by the English, as well as the Coromantine, which was ran by the English first, then the Dutch. The most famous being Accra, where the Dutch, English, Danish were all in close distance. There were brothers and sisters, and there is even still to this day, matters of slave holding houses inside of Western Africa, brothers and sisters. When you go to these places, they take you on a tour of it. The point of no return and so forth and so on. And not to get sidetracked, to the black women up there twerking at that and shaking your behind at the place where your ancestors was brought as captives, let's not wonder why the scripture says we are brought very low. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. They who were sold were brought too. Slavery in America is longer in duration than freedom. From the accepted date, and we're just going to go by that, from the accepted date of 1619 to 1865 is 246 years. From 1865 to 2023 is 158 years. The difference between 246 and 158 is 88. What are we pointing out? That even if we take, not counting the 1500s, let's just take the accepted date or given date of 1619 to 1865 of slavery, and just talking about the United States, for instance, is over 200 years. So from the matter of slavery ending in 1865 to this date, 2023, is less than 160 years. So by default, slavery legally in America, brothers and sisters, is longer in duration than its freedom. That's just a fact in that case. To be sold on board the ship. I could never make that word out. But anyway, aboard the ship on Tuesday, the 6th of May next, at Ashley Ferry, a choice of cargo of about 250 fine, healthy Negroes just arrived from the Windward and Rice Coast. The utmost care has already been taken and shall be continued to keep them free from the least danger of being infected with smallpox. No boat having been on board, and all other communication with people from Charlestown prevented. Where's Charlestown? Can anybody type that in of today? Where's Charlestown? Last thing, I thought it was in South Carolina. Maybe I stand to be corrected. Massachusetts was the first state to recognize slavery legally in the late of the year 1641. Then Connecticut, 1650. Virginia, 1661. Maryland, 1663. New York and New Jersey, 1664. South Carolina, 1682. Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, 1700. North Carolina, 1715. Georgia, 1750. These dates are for when the slavery was recognized legally, not when blacks were brought there as captives. There were captives in these places before the state recognized them legally. For instance, in Pennsylvania, the first recorded as having 150 black captives imported to cut trees and build houses in 1684, which was 3 years after it was founded as a colony. It was founded as a colony in 1681 in Pennsylvania. Our people were captive there before it was even founded as a colony. We ain't even going to talk about when it became a quote state. So Georgia was the last one in 1732 or 1733, but that's when it was still a colony. This is why I pointed out here, it seems as if the United States wants to blame the colonists and the colonists want to blame the Dutch and Spaniards. Because remember, Dutch man of war was a situation that happened in 1619. But as asked, what made that Dutch man of war comfortable to even go and bring captives over there? Because he knew about the slave trade already existing. He wasn't a pioneer and just wanted to see what can happen. He did that to get paid. They knew who they were taking. That's why the chattel enslavement of our people was not like anything else. They knew they could not work to get the cotton or the indigo or the sugar cane as our people could. But they also knew that we had to remain ignorant. And one of the worst things that the nations did was, quote, allow, for the lack of a better term, our people to read. Because once we got a hold on books and information, we see what happened. The illegal slave trade to the United States, 1808 to 1860. Why we point this out in 1808? Because according to Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, I state the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, in 1807 was saying that the international slave trade is to be made illegal when 1808 came in. That doesn't mean that it still was not happening. Amelia Island, Florida, Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Galveston, Texas. So what can we point out in this presentation, brothers and sisters, right? From Jerusalem to the hood, and how the people migrated over the course of centuries from one place to the next. What happened to them, as we see here, and even when the slave trade was made international illegal, the people were still doing it. We pointed this out on this channel about Louisiana. The brother Dora of El wrote, the seat of power of the U.S. is Maryland or Washington, D.C. So the 1634 date still doesn't let the U.S. off the hook. Thank you for that, my brother. I wanted to make sure that that was put into the statement of the chat. Thank you for that. So we want to point this out and teach it to our people that it be not forgotten. You understand? You cannot, again, pay people for doing murder, for stealing people. Now, let's look, if you will. Alexander Falconbridge in the 18th century spoke upon while being, quote, a doctor on the slave ship. Again, the gentleman's name is Alexander Falconbridge. He spoke upon saying most of the people on that ship were kidnapped. Torah says you're not supposed to steal a man and treat him as a slave, and whoever does so shall surely be put to death. So, brothers and sisters, while the land of Israel was depopulated, as we pointed out in the lesson last time, called From Jerusalem to the Hood, Part 5, by the Romans and others, and Hadrian of Rome, who passed away in the 2nd century AD or so, or the 2nd century CE or so, had the name, what we call Israel, changed to Palestinia to cause the name of Israel to be erased out of memory. While we already were fleeing into places in Western Africa as time went on, just to get picked up by the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, the English, the Danes, or the Danish, if you will, and then brought over here to the Western Hemisphere. And fearing, knowing the so-called Old Testament, the unity of our people and calling upon the Most High, they gave a concept of don't pray. There were times when people were recorded for getting their hands cut off for lifting up their hand in prayer to the Most High in slavery. Did you know that the White House was built by people who were enslaved? So I point that out. Please don't come, and this is not to sound disrespectful to anybody, please don't come saying John Adams, the second president of the United States, didn't have slaves, because the house that he lived in with, if I think his wife's name was Martha, was built by slaves. Please don't come saying Abraham Lincoln was not about the enslavement of our people when a guy named Fremont freed the people in Missouri and Lincoln put them back into slavery. When Lincoln married into the family of the Mary Todds, who was a slave-owning family in Kentucky, these people who they try to portray as the great emancipators were not. They did not want our people fighting on their side. You had, correct me if I'm wrong, what they called in the Civil War, the border states. You had Maryland fighting on the side of the Union, still being a slave state, as three others were. I believe it was Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and Delaware. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. You understand? When the Civil War broke out, it was not intended with the mindset of the Negro is going to be free, because they did not want the quote-unquote Negro fighting alongside them, even in the North. It just so happened, brothers and sisters, by the way of the Most High, as a war measure, our people were made to become not as entangled in enslavement due to that. You understand? The brother Dora of El wrote, etymology rich is Rice Kingdom Empire. Thank you for that, brother. So, if you have these people that were brought into captivity from Florida to Texas in the quote illegal era, can we say those records are still on file? Didn't they try to sit there and delete the records of such? Next part. For every stroke of the lash, Lincoln. Now, why did I point this out? What you see there on the left-hand side is a photograph of our people working as captives. from Assyria, pardon me, from Jerusalem to the hood. But before the hood, we was in the plantation. There's a book called From Plantation to Ghetto for those interested in that. You can get that online. For every stroke of the lash, it's Lincoln's inaugural speech in 1865. He stated, brothers and sisters, in 1865, that for every time a person that was a slave was beaten, for every lash, somebody in the Civil War on the quote other side of the nations died. He knew spiritually why the Civil War happened, because they were not, as I pointed out, fighting on the quote behalf of the Negro. The Most High, in the book of Isaiah, concerning our deliverance, said that he will feed our enemies their own flesh. That's in the book of Isaiah. That's what you're seeing right there. When the Most High rose up one kingdom of the south against one kingdom of the north and vice versa to go at each other. Just like he stirred up the spirit between the Babylonians with the Medes, or between the Greeks and the Romans, and so forth and so on. So did he stir up the spirit of the south to go against the north, and the north to go against the south. So when we see the president before then saying he fears for his country when he reflects that God is just, since the days of the 1820s, they feared a war coming and what the result of that war could be. Brothers and sisters. So if Lincoln was saying for every lash that a slave got, one of the soldiers in the Civil War passed away as equal judgment, as he put it, you can't pay me reparations on that. It also goes to show, brothers and sisters, that you're not going to sit down with your slave master and come to a constitutional convention and we're going to make an agreement for them to stop bullying us. Malcolm X did a speech called The Ballot or the Bullet. Which one does one choose? And I'm not here to say go out there and start attacking, because remember, the Civil War started in April 1861 in part from people that were attacking each other. We ain't got to lift sword in battle in that particular case. The Most High is going to stir them up to go against themselves. And through that process, in many cases, many of us became liberated, then began to become leaders. Like Daniel was a captive, but was a leader. Joseph was a captive, but was a leader. But see, all of that, no disrespect, is in that Old Testament. Nehemiah was a captive, but was a leader. You understand? Next part in closing out. Here we go. According to Edward Blyden in his book, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race, we see the following. If the slave is not allowed to read the Bible, the sin rests upon the abolitionists, for they stand prepared to furnish him with the key to it, which would make it not a book of hope and love and peace, but of despair, hatred, and blood, which would convert the reader not into a Christian, but a demon. Did you know that by reading the situation with Joshua and Gideon and other leaders is what helped motivate Nat Turner to do what he did? I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not by me. Where did I just read it from on the right-hand side? Is a speech that was made in 1852, July 5th, by Frederick Douglass, when he did a speech called What to the Slave is the 4th of July. So when they were up there celebrating liberty and so forth and so on, he is saying that just go to show that his people and the people celebrating have a distance between them because there's nothing to celebrate in that particular manner. That was in 1852. 2 years before that, they had what they called the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So, brothers and sisters, personally, I love history. It was disheartening to recently hear that me going over history, not even going to use the same words that I was told not too long ago. It's a B and an S word and so forth. Everything ain't for everybody. Everybody's light is not for everybody. Everybody's portion is not for everybody. But if you know that the Most High gave you whatever portion you have, it's not BS unless you're going to call it a building stone. It just ain't your portion. So when things happen and true feelings come out, just accept it for what it is. And you continue doing the mission that the Most High has you on. Good Georgie and Martha. I might have had John Adams' wife being named Martha by accident when I mentioned it verbally earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong. The origin of the Underground Railroad goes back to the 18th century. George Washington's slave escaped from Alexandria to Philadelphia. This is due in part to the work of the Quakers. Some attempt to separate the slavery of black people by saying what was not, quote, as bad as the other. However, the reasons the Spaniards gave to the government of Spain the 17th century were the same reasons the American planters gave to themselves, based on economics and the inferior thought of rights of blacks. Well, slavery here was different than slavery there. That doesn't hold weight. Never caught. The Washington's relentless pursuit of their runaway slave, Own Our Judge, by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. First president of this place here had a slave that was never caught. And they sought, and they sought, and they sought. For that in that particular case. The escape matter. The Underground Railroad, known to many through the work of Harriet Tubman, a woman who is to be honored. The name may have come from one named Tice Davids. He escaped from Kentucky and made it across the Ohio River. There were before 1850 many of the Underground Railroads on the Ohio River. This was done by stations and conductors. There were slave ships that had insurance. The Compromise of 1820 had Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had Kansas as a slave state and Nebraska not. So, brothers and sisters, I just want to point that out. Let's continue on. They who escape in the picture of escaping. What you see on the right-hand side is a picture of people during the era, ERA, of Harriet Tubman going north. What you see on the left-hand side, the extreme left-hand side, is a picture of Harriet Tubman herself and some of the people whom she was with regarding the escaping matter. So we want to point that out for edification purposes. Were these the descendants of the people who migrated from Tyre, going into Carthage, then eventually to Gambia, then taking over to the West Indies, and then reshipped in part to Virginia, and then still keep on traveling? Sadly to say, having no rest for the sole of one foot, for one place to the next. Being made to be kept busy, 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 busy. So you don't have, as the scripture says, and I think in Isaiah 30 or Isaiah 33, in quietness and stillness you will find your God. Keep the people partying. Keep the people active. Okay, captivity's over, but keep them entertained now. This is why, and I'm going to go so far as to say that the Illuminati refer to black people as what they call useless eaters. Did you know that? You ever heard of that organization that call themselves the Illuminati? They refer to our people as useless eaters. It's a waste of time having to, quote, deal with the black people or the so-forth Negro. We're expensive to them. They got to come up with new ways to sit there and keep us distracted. Let's continue on, brothers and sisters. Do what you have to do. In escaping slavery in the 19th century, some, such as Henry Box Brown, was put in such a box and shipped. For over a literal day, one was shipped from the south to the north. At times, men posed as women and women as men. See how serious they got? Light-skinned black people posed as slave masters, and dark-skinned black people posed as servants. You've seen that inside the movie recently that they came out about Harriet Tubman, where one person who was black, who was a captive, but being light-skinned, played the matter of being a master or an overseer. Most of the escapees traveled at night, and when a march was done, there was no turning back. See, once you start in that, you can't sit there and say, I feel like I'm going back. There's no backseas in this particular case. Slaves who were caught while escaping at times were beaten, castrated, or other insane matters done to them. So when we read in the so-called Old Testament in the Torah, and it says you should not return the slave back to his master, that was not part of this country's society. Hence maybe why they called it Old Testament. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. After migrating from their land to Western Africa, the Hebrews were shipped to the Western Hemisphere. Due to being pushed by the children of Ishmael and that of the Moors, the Hebrews eventually settled in Western Africa. What do I mean by that with the Moors? The Moors that you read of that took over Spain in the 8th century AD and were kicked out of Spain in the 15th century AD, went to places in Western Africa, and by the 16th century AD was selling our ancestors as slaves. They were then sold by peoples who were not their people to others who were not their people. This may explain why no one has yet claimed the people known as Black, West Indian, and African American as theirs. Recently, a noted actor stated that the term African American is an insult. That can be taken in two ways. Because when you say African American, you are in part, brothers and sisters, talking about two different continents. Whether named by Weston Miller in honor of Amerigo Vespucci, called America, brothers and sisters, or Scipio Africanus, having Africa named after him, no fault of his own, in honor of him, it is still named after somebody else. So these are things we want to point out for reference purposes. And as you see there, the map, slave arrivals on the North American mainland, North American destinations, and African origins. So from West Central Africa, Bada Bafa, Brada Benin, Gold Coast, Windward Coast, and Sierra Leone and Senegambia. Is Senegambia the same as Gambia? Correct me if I'm wrong. But what can we ascertain real quick here too, with the time allotted? And I thank you all for participating in such. Right? Let's look. Windward Coast. See that right there, brothers and sisters? Why do we point that out? Where did we see that before? Is where? Right here. Windward and Rice Coast. So when we read Windward and Rice Coast, then we see here, brothers and sisters, where it's at Windward Coast in that particular case. What can we ascertain? We went over the fact of what they call Negro land, and we're going to get into that as time goes on as well. With the thing in history lessons called History Not for the Novice. They brought to the U.S. and other places. Most of the captives were taken to South America and to the West Indies. The minority of the slave ships were brought to the current United States. Less than 30% of the total number of ships came to the country land of the United States. In the West Indies, it was not uncommon that for every 30 years, for thousands of captives to be shipped from Africa to replace the dead of the captives. Did you know that the average slave did not live to be 50? So in places like the West Indies, every 30 years, they would sit there and have the people brought in as slaves from Western Africa. In Brazil, the last known ship to get there was in 1888. Migration and closing remarks. The migration of the people who were brought to the Western Hemisphere, going from the southern places to the northern and west. We ask you all to subscribe to the channel and to let us know what you think, giving honor to the Most High, the creator of heaven and earth. Brothers and sisters, we showed the homelands of enslaved Africans shown here in the map in the red, and where they was brought to in the United States during even what they call the illegal era, if you will, and over here in what they call the legal era, brothers and sisters. And of course, we do not want to forget, and talking about this particular matter, right? Sorry about that. I skipped it, trying to get to it. People that were brought by the English, the French, the Spanish, and Carolina Grant of 1665. You ever heard of the Noor Code? Of 1685. Have you ever heard of what they call the Dobin Act? Of 1788. And I point that out about the Dolben Act of 1788, brothers and sisters, and studying, no disrespect intended, because when it is taught or stated that our people were, quote, already here, it did not come from, quote, Africa over here by force. The Dolben Act kind of squeezes that idea out the window, because the Dolben Act shows the history of the British with the slave trade, where they picked the people up from and how they felt as how many people should be in a slave ship. Look up the Dolben Act of 1788 and the Noor Code or Black Code of 1685. And again, I ask, what made in 1619 that guy comfortable to bring the captives over? 1619. Brothers and sisters, giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and Maker of heaven and earth. See where the people were scattered and brought to, and then the great migration of our people inside of the United States. From the South, or the dirty South in part, like Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, and where the people went up from there to places such as Ohio and Chicago, Illinois, if you will, Indiana, if you will, while many on the East Coast, say from Florida and Georgia, went up to what we call today New Jersey and New York, while many also went to, as pointed out from other matters, like New Orleans and Louisiana, going west in that case. So, in closing out this matter called From Jerusalem to the Hood, we hope you all subscribe to the channel, and we ask you all to comment, to like, and to share, and give an honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator, the Maker of heaven and earth. We intend on the channel more Yeshaya Torah lessons, as well as more Yeshaya Hebrew lessons. 2 Hebrew classes tomorrow. One based on Psalm 19 and another one based upon Hebrew verbs, because we want to keep the channel active. For those who offer prayers to the Most High when a brother was sick in the hospital, is definitely appreciated. For those who were there for me, one way, shape, form, fashion, or another, when a brother was down and out, I definitely do appreciate that. Most High bless you for your support and your help. I'm going to conclude this particular matter now and close out. Shalom. Subscribe to the channel. We ask you all again to comment, to like, and to share. And brothers and sisters, I can be reached at 908-587-4841. 908-587-4841. Most I be with you all. Bless. Shalom.